Brothers killing brothers, sisters dissing each other. Children dated, split siblings now missing each other. From secret societies you removed all the covers. Abused cause some choose to be ID'd by color. Negro and black, or claim a fiction on the map. Thought power is wasted on the idol god crap. Nuisance solutions, following illusions. We are old world orders but we scared of new ones. Some stuck on stupid and being humans. Some hoping Cupid would find her a new man. Sis, it will never be him, only you can. Find the one's nose that won't go like Pinocchio or Toucan. Once you think you can't, you probably won't. Might as well be hanging on a Klansman rope. Might as well jump in the coffin to get shipped up north to Canaan land, hoping someone opened the casket doors. As soon as it opened, they got a cross in your face between two slices of bread, pig marrow paste, sugar down, purple stuff, limbs hurt enough. Not free from slavery, but you doing dirt for hurting cuffs.
For the record, we in the club. We all brothers and sisters, so we in the club. But we all members of the Moorish Side Temple. We got this going on. And no, that's not what this movement is about. This is a national movement. The nation is out there. The only reason you're here is your job is to go redeem them.
All right. Islam, and welcome to Moorish Heritage and History School. This is your host, Anita L., and I'm going to be unmuting RVBey because I'm broadcasting by candlelight tonight. We had some kind of a storm up here, and we have no power. So I got all my devices lit up, checking to see how much battery I have. So I'm good.
I got your back, though, sis. You know I got your back, right?
I know you got me. I know. But I also know that you probably as overwhelmed with work as I am. And my power went out, and I was getting ready to finish so I can relax for a change, but that's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
But
well,
anyway.
You know, that might be true, but you know that on Wednesdays, I'm like everybody else, I am listening to storytelling time. So I'm right here with you. I got the book open in case something happens, and I'm going to keep up with you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes. So this is very interesting. This is a first, but how is it? What do we always say? The show must go on. So here we are. I'm
yes,
good.
The broadcast must be cast. Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right. So today is the first Wednesday of the month, and last week was the fourth Wednesday of the month. And so I was reading from White Cargo. Let's see. Before I start, I just want to let everyone know, I'm not sure. There might be some issues with getting in and listening to the broadcast in other areas because I just got a text that there's people who are having a bit of a challenge getting in. So, and this is on the other side of North America, so I really don't know what's going on. But you know what? Yesterday it seemed to be a communication issue, and I guess that's bleeding into today. Today there's also a communication issue. Is there some Mercury, Mars, something or another going on? Is this a black box day or something? Because I'm telling you, it seems to be not just me that's having this communication issue.
Let me check that. I'm going to check that and let you know. Just let me go real fast.
Yeah.
All right.
All righty. So what I'm going to do is, since I got a limited juice, let's get to reading. Last week, we read chapters 6 and 7. 6 was entitled, They Are Not Dogs, and 7 was entitled, The People Trade. This week, we're going to read chapter 8. Hold on a minute, which is entitled Spirited Away. And I just turned on my computer, and I'm getting some feedback. All right, here we go. All right. All right. Let's see. Spirited Away. Chapter 8. Now, as you know, what we do is we read 2 chapters, and then we have a discussion. So, our 2 chapters this week will be Chapter 8, Spirited Away, which I believe is relatively short. And then the next chapter is Foreigners in Their Own Land. That should be really interesting to check out. All right, so let's see. One more thing I have to do, because I gotta get these devices working so that I can transfer over when.
Oh,
I'm thinking I'm good.
Yeah, get it ready so that you can transfer over.
Yeah, right. I know.
But you know, I am looking at today is Wednesday. Oh, right. Yeah. Well, hey, the moon's in Sag. You know what I'm saying? So communication, like higher communication. Yeah. But anybody that's a Sag, you might want to be around in Gemini and you'll feel better. But today is the day of communication and, some higher learning, which we didn't really get. But I do want to say this, too, for all you lovers out there. Don't worry. Venus is in Cancer. Don't stop getting all sensitive and stuff. It'll be over with tomorrow or something. Take that serious. Because they got Venus in But, yeah, right. And I'm just trying to see what else while you doing what you do. On Libras, Jupiter's going to be good to you for a while here. Unfolding some gifts and stuff like that, provided that you on the level and the square and fair. And let's see what else is going on here. Oh, Virgo. Virgo's not retrograde yet. Mercury in Virgo is going to turn retrograde on the 12th. So, Mercury handles communication also. Are you overthinking Virgos? It gets a little hairy for y'all sometimes on that analyzing. And let me see. Then Mercury's going to go into Leo at the end of the month. But right now, it's good. Even though the moon is in Sag for higher learning, so therefore it resulted as Gemini. So we'll be all right. I'm trying to see where Uranus is because that handles electricity. You know what I'm saying? But I'll get that in a minute. Go ahead and start the show. We just
all righty.
There's some idea of what's going on and telling all them lovers to stop arguing and stuff. It's all good, okay? Stop being so sensitive. Be fair.
All righty. All right. Mm-hmm. Well,
hold on. Mars, you're in the correct place. Mars is in Leo for teaching, so you good. That's why no matter what, candlelight or not, you going for this. Like, we got to do this. It don't matter. So you good.
All righty. Well, you monitor the chat room because 2 devices that I'm using, for some reason, the Flash won't, the Flash program, the Adobe Flash doesn't work. So I open the chat room. I just won't be able to monitor it. So if you can take care of that, we will begin. Yeah. All right. So, this is chapter 8.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. I'm sorry. Hey, yeah, communication. Just hit chat, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's see if it'll open. Chat is open and moderator, correct? Chat as co-host.
Just click on chat.
Oh, launch chat. Got you.
Click on chat.
This is the thing you need to do. And, all right, go forth. If it doesn't do it, I'll put it in another browser, but it looks like it's loading. Peace.
All righty. All right, so here we are. Reading chapter 8 of White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. Now, if you want a copy, there's a PDF on the moorishnews.wordpress.com website. You can go there to check what the weekly broadcast is going to be about. You can also go there and download any attachments. So you can go there right now if you do not have the book, White Cargo, and you can load and you can download the book and you can follow along. And for those listening via internet, same thing goes for you. Alrighty? So, here we go. Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is entitled Spirited Away. Economics dictates that when there is a demand for something, a market develops. The criminal mind dictates that where there is a market, there will be those willing to supply it by whatever means. And so the insistent demand for labor in the colonies gave rise to kidnapping. As related in the previous chapter, the first kidnapper was tried in England in 1618, the year before the first shipload of children sailed from London. Accused of abducting young women for the colonies, this was no flash in the pan. A criminal industry had been born. By the middle of the 17th century, kidnapping was a flourishing business. In 1649, William Bullock, who settled in both Virginia and Barbados, wrote that, quote, the usual way of getting servants has been by a sort of men nicknamed spirits, end quote. In other words, despite all the other categories of people flowing into the colonial labor force, including free-willers, deported criminals, street children, and the rest, children had to be inveigled or enticed into slavery to take up the slack in the colonial labor force. Spirits became the colony's chief recruiting officers. Bullock described how kidnappers spirited people away. All the idle, lazy, simple people they can entice, such as have professed idleness and will rather beg than work, who are persuaded by these spirits, they shall go into a place where food shall drop into their mouths, and being thus deluded, they take courage and are transported. The numbers are unknown. Crime statistics did not exist in the 17th century. According to the Virginian clergyman Morgan Goodwin, 10,000 people were being spirited away every year by the late 1600s. But this figure has been described as absurdly large, inflated for the purpose of propaganda. Walter Blumenthal suggests that it is not improbable that the number of browbeaten indentured servants, transportees, convicts, and kidnapped may have together exceeded 10,000 in certain years. This was especially likely during the middle years of the 1600s, when Cromwellian excesses their highest in Ireland. We know of many cases of kidnapping through court records. Elizabeth Hamlin became the first recorded spirit charged at Middlesex Assize in London with taking diverse little children in the street and selling them to be carried to Virginia. She was sentenced to be whipped and to appear again at the next session. Other spirits followed Hamlin into the dark intermittently. Between 1625 and 1701, kidnapping came up at the Middlesex County Court. That's Great Britain, just so you know. Middlesex County Court is Great Britain. This small number of cases across so many years is not a measure of the size of the problem. It is rather an indication of the lackadaisical manner in which law enforcement agencies dealt with it. Among those cases that did come to trial was that of Christian Charit, who stood trial in 1655. He was accused of being one that taken up men and women and children and sells them on a ship to be conveyed beyond the inveigled, the Furnival family, husband, wife, and infant, on board the planter bound for Virginia. In a trial of 1658, Anne Gray was accused of living idly and out of service and of spiriting a 16-year-old maid onto a ship. The scale of this shady trade is being estimated not by the number of cases, but by the scale of criminal activity revealed through the evidence of the trial. For kidnappers often admitted to or were accused of very large numbers of offenses. In 1671, a spirit called William Haverland was convicted of kidnapping and turned king's evidence. He made accusations against a large number of other spirits, 16 in all, including a haberdasher, a seaman, 2 victuallers, and a waterman. Haverland claimed that a man named John Stewart had practiced spiriting for 12 years, kidnapping people for Barbados, Virginia, and other places, 500 in a year, as he had confessed. If the evidence of Haverland is to be believed, Stewart accounted for 6,000 victims in just over a decade. While such a number cannot be verified, the evidence demonstrates that Stewart was considered by his peers to be admirably prolific and diligent in his trade. According to Haverland, Stewart paid 75 shillings to anyone who provided him with a victim. Stewart then sold them on for 40 shillings apiece. In another affidavit, Haverland accused William Thymee, a shoemaker of East Smithfield, of spiriting away 840 people, while Robert Bailey, who plied his trade from St. Catherine and St. Giles, was described as an old spirit who had no other way of livelihood. All these spirits required accomplices, strong-armed men and fences, or dealers in stolen goods, ship captains or other agents, merchants both in Britain and in the colonies, through to corrupt officials and magistrates on both sides of the Atlantic. The usual operation involved luring the innocent, the gullible, and the drunk into makeshift prisons where they could be held until a ship was found for them. If the spirit and the captain already had a business arrangement, the victims could be taken directly onto ships riding at anchor in the Thames, while victims once ensnared could be forcibly held against their will. Violent tactics such as those used by the Navy's press gangs seem to have been a last resort. Kidnapping developed to encompass several types of operatives, each with a distinct role in the business. A key trade was that of office keeper. As with spiriting, this was a euphemism. The office keeper provided a base from which to run operations, maybe a tape room to entertain potential clients, and possibly a secure cellar or attic to hold those awaiting a ship. The office keeper also provided a plausible front to the world. As with the spirit, the office keeper used deceptive or any other art to get the unwary or gullible on board a ship. The only difference seems to have been that while the kidnapper might not necessarily have worried about papers of indenture, the office keeper would by any devious means obtain a signature or, as most people were illiterate, a mark. The sly and shifty nature of the business is very well caught in this description in London. 3 or 4 blades, well dressed, but with hawks, countenances, those fine fellows who look like footmen upon a holiday crept into cast suits of their masters, are kidnappers who walk the change in order to seduce people who want services, and young fools crossed in love and under an uneasiness of mind to go beyond seas, getting so much ahead of masters and ships and merchants who go over for every wretch they trepan into this misery. This was no honest business. Writer made clear in his description of the spirit victims. Half a dozen ragamuffin fellows showing poverty in their rags and despair in their faces, mixed with a parcel of young wild striplings like runaway princesses. That house which they are entering is an office where servants for the plantation bind themselves to be miserable as long as they live. Those young rakes and tattered Damalians you see so lovingly handled are drawn by their fair promises to sell themselves into slavery. The picture emerges of organized crime, targeted people across all sections of society. The unwary apprentice could just as easily fall prey to the kidnapper as the vagrant and the unemployed. But the kidnapper did prefer the young to the old. This was no surprise, for the labor markets in America and Barbados favored the young and healthy. Those most at risk were children over the age of 10, particularly teenagers. Young men and women ages up to their mid-20s. Spirits were active not only in London but all across the British Isles, in ports including Southampton, Aberdeen, Dublin, and particularly Bristol. The illicit trade in Bristol was the figure of Judge Jeffreys, the drunken lawyer who was made Lord Chief Justice by Charles II. Today, Jeffreys is best remembered for conducting the bloody assizes of 1685, in which he sentenced around 330 of the Duke of Monmouth's rebels to death, and 800 more to be to transportation. During the assizes, Jeffreys learned that a young boy had been taken from prison and illegally transported. It appears that the child was a victim of the sort of racket played out in many seaports. Petty thieves, rogues, and vagabonds would be brought before the local justices and told the only way to save their necks was by agreeing to transportation. Some villains, scared for their lives, would agree. The justices and their friends would then sell the rogues off to merchants or ship's captains for the slave market of the New World. In the case of this young boy, Jeffreys discovered the culprit. They included the city's mayor, whom Jeffreys fined £1,000. The case of the child exposed the corruption of not only Bristol, but of the age. It was to Judge Jeffreys' credit that he spotted this nasty little scream and did his best to put a stop to it. Only 3 years later, when James II took flight, Jeffreys also tried to flee abroad but was recognized having a last drink in an inn and ended his days in the Tower of London, where he died of a stomach ulcer aggravated by alcohol. Kidnapping was so prevalent that it became the subject of fiction, appearing in stories by writers including Daniel Defoe and Robert Louis Stevenson. One spirit was supposed to have made St. Paul's Cathedral his headquarters. It is tempting to imagine the spirit practicing his devious arts around and about the cathedral while the dean, the poet John Donne, thundered from the pulpit about how deprived children might be given a second chance in a foreign land. The old St. Paul's was swept away in the Great Fire of 1666, and maybe the spirit with it. It is hard to think of the Warden's neoclassical cathedral allowing such malign spirits to linger within. By the middle of the 1600s, fear of kidnapping became so great that hysteria swept over the land, especially among families living in or near ports, and even causing occasional mass panic among young women and other potential victims. False accusations were made by citizens against citizens. In 1645, Margaret Robinson was called before a court to answer the accusation that she assaulted one Mary Hodges, saying she was a spirit. William Gout and Thomas Faulkner, accused of attacking Margaret Emerson, and falsely claimed she was, quote, a spirit or an enticer or inveigler of children, there being no charge or accusation laid against her. Some years later, Susan Jones was accused by Rebecca Allen of raising a tumult against her and calling of her spirit. Kidnapping was the subject of sensationalist popular journalism of a style we would all recognize today. One outdated broadsheet gives a typical vivid account of large-scale shipping of children in London. The report was published by John Reed of Fleet Street, London, and is preserved in the British Library. It begins with sensational headlines. The Grand Kidnapper at last taken, or a full and true account of the taking and apprehending of Captain Azaria Daniel for conveying away the bodies of Jonathan Butler and Richard Blagrave. Also, the confession he made before Justice Richards in Spitalfield with his commitment to Newgate, with account of Edward Harrison conveying away the children of Thomas Vernon, salesman, with the manner of his confession, how 150 children more have been sent down the river in several ships with his commitment to Newgate. The account contains so much detail of the scale of the spirit business that it is worth quoting further. The noise which the detention of the former kidnapper had made in the town occasioned such strict inquiry to be made after other children which have been lost by their afflicted parents that, pursuant to their great care, all houses near the waterside and all outward bound ships now in the river have been severely searched, and many children rescued by those means from the dangers that threatened them. But though the theft was regained, the thieves, for the generality, made their escape. And we have had but 3, and those not the principal, who have been taken those abominable practices till Wednesday the 7th of this instant September, when one Captain Azaria Daniel, commander of a ship now in the river, coming by the stock market, was met by 2 gentlemen who, having lost their children, pursuant to the information they had of him, were in search after him. The 2 distraught parents had their wits about them, for they had already obtained a warrant from a magistrate for the arrest of Captain Daniel. While one of them went to a constable, the other followed the captain to a public house. The captain was arrested and taken before the magistrate. Justice Richards, the justice, asked the suspect where he lived. The captain gave his true address, which was unfortunate for him because the magistrate immediately ordered his lodgings to be searched. And the rooms being searched, 2 children were found in the garret. With the discovery of the children, both ages about 12, Daniel was sent to Newgate to await trial. The same broadsheet contains a second case of a missing child. Mr. Vernon, a salesman in the parish of Stepney, having but one child, and that sometime since lost, was very solicitous in inquiring after him. And pursuant to his great care in looking after him, he received information that one mariner who lived in the neighborhood had been seen with a boy about the age of his son was described to be of, and who seemed very unwilling to go along with him. Accordingly, Mr. Vernon went to Sir Robert Goffrey's, and having gotten his warrant, took a constable with him and went to the house of Edward Harrison. The prisoner seemed at first surprised at his unexpected apprehension and seemed sensible of nothing of guilt, protesting much for his innocency. But being brought before the justice, it failed him, and several convenient questions being put to him by Sir Robert, he at last confessed he had conveyed the child 3 weeks since aboard a Barbados ship now in the river, and besides him there were about 150 more aboard several other ships in the said river bound to His Majesty's plantation. Having made his ingenious confession, his mittimus Daniel was made for Newgate, and he was accordingly sent prisoner thither. And several parents who have lost their children have got the Lords of the Admiralty's warrant in order to search all outward bound ships for the recovery of them. Conspiracy, but they did little good. In 1645, Parliament ordered all officers of the law to keep a watch for those stealing, selling, buying, inveigling, purloining, conveying, or receiving children. Port officials were instructed to search all vessels in the river and at the downs for such children. A year later, a further law required customs officers in England to keep records of those leaving and for colonial governors to send returns of those arriving in their territory. In 1654, Bristol Council ordered that a book should be kept detailing the names of indentured passengers on board ships heading for the colonies. Merchants and other worthies petitioned Parliament in 1661 and 1662 to introduce official sanctions against spirits, but it failed to act. In 1664, a plan was put forward to have every immigrant bound for the colonies interviewed and asked whether or not they were going of their own free will. In 1670, Parliament made kidnapping, any deceit or force to steal any person or persons with intent to sell or transport them into ports beyond the sea, an offense punishable by death. None of it made much difference. The kidnappers continued to thrive. Justice was very inadequately administered in London. As the great chronicler of immigration, Peter Coldham, notes in Immigrants in Chains, in the courts of the metropolis, the thief of a horse merited much stiffer penalties than the theft of a person. In 1680, a spirit named Anne Servant was tried before Middlesex Aziz for assaulting a young woman called Alice Black and putting her on board a ship that took her to Virginia, where she was sold. Anne Servant confessed 15 shillings and 6 cents. A horse staff would have been hanged. In 1682, a government initiative to protect children from being spirited against their will laid out strict guidelines for indentures. How little effect all the government attempts to clamp down actually can be judged from yet another case in the Middlesex court. In 1684, a male and a female spirit who had kidnapped a 16-year-old girl were fined the derisory sum of 12 pences. Such fines reflected both how the courts viewed kidnapping in general, that magistrates and judges often allowed the accused to pay a sum in compensation to their victims. From the Middlesex records, it is obvious that many cases reported to the court never proceeded to trial. At the end of the 17th century, spiriting continued to play as important a role in supplying labor to the British colonies as it had near the beginning. Kidnapping was allowed to flourish because it was respectable businesses' shady siblings. One authority has pointed out that instead of being deplorable outlaws in the servant trade, spirits were the faithful and indispensable adjunct, along with advertisements from those searching for lost relatives. In October 1700, the London Post Boy ran an advertisement from a father offering a reward for the return of his 11-year-old son who was feared kidnapped. Spirits could continue to rely on authority, turning a blind eye to their work and to their victims, rarely living long enough to gain their freedom and return to confront them with their crimes. Yet, as we will see later on in Chapter 17, in 2 celebrated instances, kidnapped victims did return to seek retribution and restitution. But perhaps the most important reasons why kidnapping grew and thrived in the 17th century were that spiriting away a convenient way for society to rid itself homeless, and that very often the government simply decided it had more urgent matters to deal with, such as those that unfold in the following chapter. All right, well, I made it through Chapter 8. Look at that. By candlelight, no less. Chapter 9 is a little bit more lengthy, yes, and let's see, it's 8:20. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to begin reading. Yeah, Chapter 9 is much, much lengthier than Chapter 8. So let's get started, and what we're going to do is hopefully I can get this in, somewhere around 9 o'clock, and then we can begin taking callers. As you know, what we do is after we read 2 chapters, usually we can get 2 chapters in by 9 o'clock. We then open up the lines and we talk about some of the information that has been unveiled in these 2 chapters. So let us continue. Chapter 9, Foreigners in Their Own Land. An interesting title. In the Elizabethan period, young blades went to Ireland to prove themselves and get rich. As we saw in Chapter 1, Sir Walter Raleigh and his half-brother, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, went to make war. The poet Edmund Spenser settled there to lead the life of a gentleman, confiscated estate near that occupied by Raleigh. There were risks, of course. Ireland was where court favorite, the Earl of Essex, ended his career in bloodshed and failure despite the assistance of the ruthless Francis Drake. What happened in Ireland over several centuries had a direct bearing on how the first English settlement in America were approached and developed. Many great English adventurers and soldiers learned their craft in Ireland before searching for greater and easier pickings farther west. For the Elizabethan blue bloods and youthful gentry with fire in their bellies, Ireland became a land of adventure. By the late 1500s, all kinds of Englishmen were crossing the narrow stretch of water in search of their fortunes. Some fared well and others less so, but in almost all instances, their prosperity was brought at a heavy cost to the locals. We do not need to get a complete account of what happened in Ireland, for that has been told so often and so clearly by historians over the years, but attempt an impression of the forces, psychological as well as social and political, that propelled Ireland into the front line of the transatlantic adventure. For any English ship putting out for the West Indies and America, Ireland was there to be sailed past or around. Ships stopped on the way for supplies, and Ireland became an important point on the route to the West. It was natural that Irish men and women would get swept up in the great colonial adventure. Very early on, Irish servants were taken across the ocean under the indentured servant scheme. No doubt many idle or curious people who ventured to the quayside of ports such as Waterford in the southeast or Kinsale in the southwest were enticed aboard ships and became immigrants before they hardly knew it. This adventure forged a firm link between England and Ireland, and then to the new colonies across the Atlantic. Triangular relationship grew throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, and among the ties that held it was the chains of bondage. The headright system that we have seen play such a key role in populating the American colonies was from early times used to promote immigration from Ireland. One 17th century planter from Ireland managed to amass an estate of 32,000 acres in Maryland thanks to the numbers of servants he brought over. George Talbot from County Roscommon transported the astonishing number of 640 servants in the space of 12 years. He seems to have been determined to create an entire colony by his sole endeavor. Immigrants from Ireland included the Scottish Irish, Scots who had settled in Ulster. Many were moved to go because their particular nonconformist religion was officially discouraged at home. They found support and a welcome in colonies such as Delaware and Pennsylvania. This was particularly the case after the restoration of the English crown in 1660, when the official view on dissenting religions hardened. This impelled Irish Quakers to settle in Pennsylvania, the first Quaker state, and New Jersey. Presbyterian ministers in Ireland began to lead their congregations to America, especially to Carolina, seeing themselves as leaders of flocks of lost people in search of the promised land. Their zeal was no doubt sharpened by the official financial inducements offered for ministers to immigrate. The Test Act of 1704 impelled more dissenters to make the journey from Ireland to America, for it not only barred them from high office, it not only barred them from high office, but also ruled their marriages invalid. The Irish Catholic experience was driven by a similar policy of exclusion. The Reformation under Henry VIII did not impinge all that much on Ireland, but under Elizabeth I, the desire to impose some uniformity of religion upon Ireland became much more strident. By the middle of the 1600s, Irish Catholics, the vast majority of the people, found themselves subject to an English scheme to eradicate them. Of course, the English and the Normans had sparred with the Irish for centuries. The English thought of the Irish as having the ability to entice colonists into taking on their culture and way of life. Vikings, Normans, Welsh, Scots, and English had gone to Ireland over the centuries, and many had been swallowed up by it, like a lost goblet taken slowly down into the bog. The eminent social and economic historian Fernand Braudel has pointed out that the Irish were seen by the English as different in quality from the Scots or the Welsh. The Irish were the enemy, savages, simultaneously despised and feared. The consequences were mutual in comparison, high-handedness by the invaders, and horrors whose sinister catalog needs no elaboration. The story has been told with lucidity and honesty by English historians themselves. The English in America thought it reasonable to settle in a land already inhabited by others. They viewed the indigenous population as one to conquer, eradicate, or enslave. This view of the world was undoubtedly learned, and it was probably learned in Ireland by viewing the Irish as barbarians. The English could have no qualms about invading their land. The Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland prepared the mindset that was to propel the English farther west centuries later. Just as 1066 is a date to be remembered by every school child in England, 1166 should be remembered by every child in Ireland. It was the date when the deposed king of Leinster, Dermot MacMurchada, invited Henry II of England into Ireland to help him regain his crown. Henry stayed, and by 1171 had firmly established a bridgehead reaching from Dublin to Drogheda, Pale, after the Latin palace or state. What happened to the Irish after that was to have interesting parallels with what happened in the American colonies. A few years after Henry established his bridgehead, a Welsh cleric named Giraldus Cambrensis wrote a lasting work of collective character assassination, the history and topography of Ireland, listed all the Irish vices, blasphemy, laziness, treachery, incest, and cannibalism among them. Cambrensis' fiction provided the basis for English views of Ireland for several hundred years and rankled with the Irish for just as long. Such beliefs helped to justify the deeds of ruthless military leaders such as Sir Humphrey Gilbert, of whom we have already heard so much. His policy in Ireland was to slaughter even non-combatants on the ground that terror among the population made short wars. The Anglo-Norman expeditions into Ireland marked the start of a sorry and drawn-out history of enmity and struggle. The Irish would be cut off from their own land, their own laws, and at the same time not allowed recourse to the laws of the colonizers. A group of Irish noblemen complained to the Pope that under the English laws, no Englishman could be punished for killing an Irishman. The Irish was made into second-class citizens without the rights accorded to them. The compelling parallels between this and in the way in which the slave labor system in America accorded rights to some but not to others has been highlighted by Theodore Allen in The Invention of the White Race. Wow, gonna have to check out that book. As Allen relates, under Anglo-American slavery, the rape of a female slave was not a crime, but a mere trespass on the master's property. Pair this with Ireland in 1278, when two Anglo-Normans were brought into court and charged with raping one Margaret O'Rourke. They were found not guilty because the said Margaret is an Irish woman. We can see that from the 12th until the 16th century, Ireland was a laboratory in which social ideas and legal conventions would be forged and which found their echo in the labor systems of the American colonies. A law enacted in Virginia in 1723 provided that manslaughter of a black slave is not punishable. Under Anglo-Norman law in Ireland, for someone standing accused of manslaughter to be acquitted, he had only to show that the slain victim was Irish. Anglo-Norman priests granted absolution on the grounds that it was no more sin to kill an Irishman than a dog or any other brute. The first serious rebellion in Ireland began in 1594 and became known as the 9-Year War. Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, a title given to him by King Henry VIII, was Ulster's most powerful leader, and he was alarmed at the increasing pace of plantation. After starting well, Tyrone threw in the towel in 1603 and submitted to James I, who had just succeeded Queen Elizabeth. Hugh O'Neill's rebellion sparked other uprisings around the country, especially in Munster, in the southwest. There were high-profile casualties, including Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh bounced back from this reversal. For Spencer, it was the end of his fortune. The creator of the pastoral ideals of the fairies' queen was burned in Westminster Abbey at Chancellor's Foot at the age of 46, but not before he had made a helpful suggestion of what to do with the Irish. They should be starved from the landscape. Spencer's proportion would prove to be prophetic. 4 years after his rebellion ended, Hugh O'Neill, along with several other Irish nobles and their families, sailed out of Lough Swilly and into in Europe. The flight of the Earls was the signal the English had been waiting for. Ulster had long been a thorn in England's side, with homegrown opposition providing a possible platform for Spanish design. As O'Neill sailed over the horizon, all chance of organized resistance receded with him. Now the coast was clear for the plantation of Ulster. It was September 1607, just 5 months after the English settlers had founded Jamestown. The colonization of Ireland led to a large proportion of the indigenous population becoming rootless at home. Wandering vagabonds and vagrant villains roamed the land, though more freely than in England, where the poor laws kept the homeless tied to their native parishes. Some saw transportation as the obvious answer to the problem of what to do with the native Irish in general. There was even a proposal as early as 1607 to transport 7,000 or 8,000 of the most obdurate rebels and vagrants. These imaginative schemes proved to be before their time. It was not until Cromwell came to Ireland with his more robust attitudes that they would be taken up, and then with some vigor. There were those who felt strongly that the plantation of Ireland was a better bet than the plantation of North America. For a start, it was much closer. The Solicitor General, Sir Francis Bacon, thought the Irish project scored strongly on religious, political, and investment criteria. The financial arrangements for the two ventures were remarkably similar. In fact, the organization of the Ulster venture followed the lines established for North America. Just as the money for America was raised in the City of London through newly created joint stock companies such as the Virginia Company, the Ulster venture was also funded by city investment. One important difference was that while the American companies were promoted by private enterprise on largely unwilling city merchants by the king. While struggling to make a go of planting Ireland, the English continued with their transatlantic endeavors. They would carry some Irish with them. The first English toehold in the West Indies was on St. Christopher, now St. Kitts, where some French had already settled. Captain Thomas Warner, a dogged Suffolk Puritan, together with his wife, son, and a small number of men, claimed the island for James I. Warner had already traveled widely to the New World and had seen the Amazonian basin. Now he wanted a place that he could settle and make something of. St. Christopher already had its local inhabitants, the Kalinago people. They had arrived many years before, drawn by the island's good soil, and had displaced the previous inhabitants, the Arawak, by being better at warfare. They were not to be trifled with. After the Kalinago had come the Spanish, then a handful of French Jesuits, followed by the Spanish again, and then by the first Englishman, John Smith, passing through on his way to Virginia. Thomas Warner came next. He developed a wary relationship with the Kalinago chief, Ubotu Tegremonte, and within 2 years had established his little colony sufficiently well, he felt, to sail to England for more colonists. While he was there, he picked up a warrant from Charles I, giving him control over a sizable part of the West Indies. The new colonists that returned with Warner in 1626 were mainly Irish indentured servants who slashed and burned the vegetation to make room for the arable crops they would live on and the crops they would sell, tobacco. And so the Irish came in numbers to the Caribbean. In the 1640s, a fanciful report claimed some 20,000 Irish were living on St. Christopher. Although this number seems improbable, we can take it that a good number of Irish did arrive on the island. In whatever manner they arrived, as voluntary indentured servants, involuntary indentured servants, or as transportees. They became, in their multitude, slaves in the plantation. St. Christopher prospered through tobacco. Those Irish who survived their indenture could start up their own smallholding fertile land. But when the Virginian tobacco trade picked up, the smaller producers began to suffer. Some Irish in the Caribbean went on to become major planters and slave owners themselves. Into this stark new world sailed a trading ship called the Abraham in 1636. The reports of its dealings between Ireland and Barbados are contained in a unique series of letters preserved at the Admiralty in London, and these give an excellent insight into the recruitment process for servants in the mid-1600s. The ship was owned by a merchant named Matthew Craddock, a Puritan and the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Company. His agent, or supercargo, Thomas Anthony, had the job of drumming up a human cargo in Ireland before the ships arrived. The men and women Anthony persuaded to sign up would be indentured for 4 years and sold in the colonial labor market. Anthony was a punctilious employee, and his letters provide a record of a man who wished his boss to know that his slow progress was not for want of trying. Though he labored for months, Anthony had difficulty raising the necessary numbers to make up his cargo. Craddock had hoped for 100 servants from a local ship and from a Flemish ship out of Amsterdam. When he arrived in Kinsale on 28 April, 4 months before the Abraham, Anthony vigorously put the word out for people wishing to start a new life, writing on 13 September. The spelling and grammar are so idiosyncratic that we have changed quotations and modern usage for the sake of comprehensibility. And now it may please you to be informed that upon the first days of market after the ship's arrival, both here at Bandock Court and at Youghal, we caused the drum to be beaten. Around the country, Anthony still had not got his complement of 100 servants. And hitherunto we have entertained and forthcoming the number of 61 persons, whereof there is 41 men servants, the rest womenkind, from 17 to 35 years, and very lusty and strong bodied, which will, I hope, be means to set them off to the best advantage. To obtain his complement of 61, Anthony seemed to have to resort to some knavery, probably involving kidnapping, as the mayor of Kinsale put him in the town gaol until he had released 2 of the servants recruited locally, prison, indicating either a quick bribe or the release of those he had not recruited legally. Finally, in November, the Abraham set sail for Barbados. We know the level of profits that Anthony made for his boss, for he wrote to him on 13 February 1637, nearly a year after he had arrived in court. By then, his cargo had diminished to 56, 3 having probably died on the journey, a very low rate of mortality, as rates of death on board ship could sometimes reach 20 or even 30%. And 2 having absconded in Cowes on the Isle of Wight. From Cowes, we brought 56 for your account, which were disposed of to sale, 10 of them to the governor of this place in 450 weight, pounds of tobacco apiece, and all the rest in 500. In total, Anthony's cargo made a profit of 27,500 pounds of tobacco, a nice sum, even without the thought bonus of the kidnapped inhabitants of Kinsale. All right, so let's see, where are we? All right. Back in Ireland, 50 years after Spencer's death, his radical proposals were about to be put into play. A new and more strident plantation policy paved the way for the large-scale movement of the Irish across the Atlantic. The political events that led up to this mass migration of people began in England, but quickly spread to Ireland. As relations between Charles I and Parliament worsened in the 1640s, The Irish Catholics saw a chance of making capital. The century of the rebellion was in Ulster, where the plantation of large numbers of Protestants had made the situation very volatile. The rebels killed some 4,000 Protestants to another 8,000 are thought to have perished through starvation and want. Exaggerated reports circulated in London that up to 100,000 Protestants had been killed. The Irish uprising spread throughout the country. A confederacy was formed to fight the English, with even the Old English were reluctantly joining in, but it was riven with disagreements and militarily flawed. The English parliamentarians decided to take firm action. An act was passed, Irish. The act offered 2,500,000 acres of confiscated Irish land at knockdown prices to merchant adventurers. Wow. Those who would invest in the army that was to be raised to suppress the insurrection. The Irish, their religion, and their propensity for siding with England's enemies would be crushed once and for all, and the adventurers would be rewarded with the land confiscated to enable Protestants to resettle. Irish would become outlaws in their own land, and their former property would be sold off at the low market prices to pay for the military operations that would have taken it from them. It was as brilliant as it was brutal, one of those elegant pieces of synergism that must make the difficult task of ruling occasionally satisfying. A contemporary, though not impartial observer, the papal nuncio Giovanni Battista Rinuccini, said that the Irish transported to the Indies were held like slaves under a cruel lash. Among many sad stories, Rinuccini reported the case of the wife of a Catholic man being deported because of his faith pleading to be allowed to accompany her husband into exile. The woman was refused on the grounds that she was not strong enough to work in the Indian islands, the West Indies. She was thrown into prison while her husband was sent to his fate. Sir Clem O'Neill, one of the key leaders of the rebellion, carefully made clear that the argument was not with the king, but with Parliament. To begin with, this was a good move, but it ceased to be so when Charles I denied. On 20 June that year, Oliver Cromwell was appointed Lord Lieutenant and Commander-in-Chief of the Army in Ireland. Macaulay, in his History of England, described vividly what Cromwell achieved. Everything yielded to the vigor and ability of Cromwell. In a few months, he subjugated Ireland, as Ireland had never been subjugated during the 5 centuries of slaughter which had elapsed since the landing of the first Norman settlers. He resolved to put an end to that conflict of races and religions which had so long distracted the island by making the English and Protestant population decidedly predominant. For this end, he gave the rein to the fierce enthusiasm of his followers, waged war resembling that which Israel waged on the Canaanites, smote the idolaters with the edge of the sword, so that great cities were left without inhabitants, drove many thousands to the continent, shipped off many thousands to the West Indies, and supplied the void thus made by pouring in numerous colonists of Saxon blood and of Calvinistic faith. Cromwell began his war in Ireland by marching against Drogheda, a prosperous town 30 miles north of Dublin, and a key strategic position from which to advance into Ulster. On the evening of 11 September, the parliamentarians overwhelmed the town, slaughtering officers and soldiers. Catholic priests and friars were treated as combatants and killed on sight. A moment of gruesome farce came when the commander of the defending forces, Sir Arthur Austin, was bludgeoned to death with his wooden leg, in which parliamentarian soldiers believed he had hidden gold coins. Some 3,500 people died in the storming of Drogheda. Parliamentarian losses were around 150. Many of the surviving defenders were transported to Barbados. An interesting two-way trade in people was developing in which something beneficial emerged for both those wanting to colonize Ireland and those backing America. Native Irish could be deported to feed the voracious labor market in America while making room in Ireland for planters from England. This does not seem to have been an orchestrated movement, but it was a nice piece of serendipity for nascent imperial capitalism. Turmoil, famine followed war on a terrible scale. Proposals for deportation came quickly to the fore. It is difficult to know how many people were banished during this period, for no records exist. However, there are clues. Oh, great. All right. It's fantastic. Just as my computer was about to die, we got electricity back.
Wow.
All right.
Interesting. See that it always works out. I got a comment that I wanted to make real quick, if I could, before you open up the lines.
I know I got a couple more pages left to read. I'm almost done, though.
Oh, I thought you were done. Oh, no, finish, please.
No.
Oh. Go ahead.
No.
I took
notes.
notes.
Listen now. I'm almost done. I got a couple more pages. All right. To feed the voracious labor market in America while making room in Ireland for planters from England. This does not seem to have been an orchestrated movement, but it was a nice piece of serendipity for nascent imperial capitalism. In the ensuing turmoil, famine followed war on a terrible scale. Proposals for deportation came quickly to the fore. It is difficult to know how many people were banished during this period, for no records exist. However, there are clues to what was going on. The Puritans, who now ruled Ireland, had only one goal: the total subjugation of Ireland by the method of destroying its people and planting in their stead Protestant stock from England and Scotland. The destruction of the Irish was to be carried out by three methods: by starvation, by banishment to the west or to continental Europe, and by transportation across the Atlantic. Men, women, and children were all shipped off at various times from various locations. The transportation of the Irish began in the late 1640s and certainly reached a high level in 1652-3, the year that marked the partial obliteration of the Catholic people of Ireland. On 1 April 1653, Cromwell's Council of State issued a license to one Sir John Clothworthy to transport to America 500 Irishmen. The license was careful to point out that these unfortunates should be natural Irishmen, in case the auspicious Sir John made the mistake of sending off some descendants of the Old English or Norman settlers. Such a mistake was made when young women descended from the early Anglo-Norman settlers were abducted and sold by traders to the sugar plantations in the West Indies. Licenses were granted to English merchants throughout the year. In June, the Council of State in England ordered that the governors of the precincts be authorized to transport 8,000 Irish. Later that year, the Council of State granted a license for 400 Irish children to be taken to New England and Virginia. Around the same time, a contract was signed with Boston merchants to carry off 250 women and 300 men from ports along Ireland's southern and southeastern coast. Contracted merchants, leaders, and Selleck, the latter a merchant who was particularly prominent among those importing Irish labor, were to be allowed to search for their slaves within 20 miles of Wexford, Waterford, Kinsale, Youghal, and Cork. The onerous task of having to search along such a long stretch of coastline was mercifully mitigated when the English grandee with control over Cork, Lord Broghill, said he would allow the merchants to pick their slaves from among the people of Cork alone. In the 1650s, Ireland was a desolate place. The land became dreadfully depopulated due to war, famine, and disease. Hundreds of thousands of who vanished over a mere decade or so. Charles Walpole described the situation. The English government had a grim excuse for repeopling Ireland. The desolation of the island was complete. 1/3 of the people had perished or been driven into exile. Famine and plague had finished the work of the sword. The fields lay uncultivated, and the miserable remnants of the flying population were driven to live on carrion and human corpses. The wolves so increased in numbers, even around the city of Dublin itself, that the counties were taxed for their extermination, and rewards of £5 was paid for the head of a full-grown wolf and £2 for that of a cub. Wolves were not the only troublesome creatures with a price on their heads. There were also the priests and the Tories. Tories were guerrilla fighters who lived in the forests, mountains, and bogs and operated mainly at night, launching raiding parties against those who had usurped their land. Some degenerated into banditry, freedom fighters, or rogues. They all had a plight. One way of dealing with them was to hold 4 people hostage against the capture of any Tory committing a crime. If within 28 days the crime went unsolved and the Tory had not given himself up, the 4 would be shipped off to the colony. Ordinary holy man's head was prized the same as that of a wolf, but a bishop's head would fetch twice that, namely 10 pounds. Keeping or hiding a priest would merit banishment and the confiscation of all property. A Francian who had to flee Ireland told of one such case. Anno 1657, I myself saw this iniquitous law carried out into iniquitous execution in the city of Limerick in Ireland by Henry Ingoldsby, governor of the same city. A certain nobleman of Thomad, named Daniel Connery, was accused of harboring a priest in his house and convicted on his own confession, although the priest had safe conduct from the governor himself, and declared guilty of death. And then, as he said, out of misery, the sentence was changed, commuted, and he was despoiled of all his goods and bound in prison, and finally condemned to perpetual exile. This gentleman had a wife and 12 children. His wife was of a very noble family of Thomad, and she fell sick and died in extreme want of necessities. 3 of the children, very beautiful and virtuous virgins, were sent off to the East Indies, to an island they call Barbados, where, if they are still alive, they spend their days in miserable slavery. Catholics who refused to attend a Protestant church could be fined. If they could not raise the money to pay, as was no doubt the case for the majority, they would be transported to Barbados and sold as a slave. In Galway, merchants procured numbers of the population of the sales to the slave markets of the Indies. Invasion and occupation turned people against one another. Corrupt officials engaged in the trade. During this time, those Irish who had been banished or transported were dismayed. Expression of their language and religion was replicated in the transatlantic colonies. The Puritans were determined people, but so were the Irish Catholics. Priests disguised themselves and went secretly about their work in both Ireland and the West Indies to keep their religion alive. Even on islands that had already had French or Spanish and therefore Catholic settlements, Irish Catholics were forbidden to attend religious services except in Protestant churches, as was the case at home. With the end of the Confederate War in 1653, transportation continued. The war had created large numbers of widows and orphans, and many of these were shipped to the West Indies. According to Walpole, women and orphans were rounded up from workhouses. They were, he said, boys who were of an age to labor and women who were marriageable or not past breeding. The children were put to work in the fields while the women were married off to planters. The creation of a colonial Ireland cost the native Irish dearly. They lost not only their land, but what remained of their reputation. The Irish character, already blackened by Cambreness and by a tendency to stage occasional uprisings, was reputed to be so bad that when American colonists got to hear of it, they began to fear even the impoverished and emancipated souls who migrated to their shore. As a result, acts were passed prohibiting the landing of Irish in Massachusetts. On one such act in 1654 was formulated by a committee appointed by the General Court of Massachusetts to consider proposals for the public benefit. This court, considering the cruel and malignant spirit that has from time to time been manifest in the Irish nation against the English nation, do hereby declare their prohibition of bringing any Irish men, women, or children into this jurisdiction on the penalty of £50 sterling to each inhabitant who shall buy of any merchant, shipmaster, or other agent any such person or persons so transported by them, which fine shall be by the country's marshal levied on conviction of some magistrate or court, to be 1/3 to be to the use of the informer, and 2/3 to the country. This act to be in force 6 months after the publication of this order. For those Irish already in the colonies, they continue to be singled out for particularly harsh treatment. In 1658, the authorities decided that English bonded servants in the American colonies should have their minimum bond period extended from 4 to 5 years. It was already 5 years for Irish servants, and so to keep the differential intact, the length of following the restoration of the monarchy 2 years later, this extra year of servitude was withdrawn from servants from both England and Ireland in the interest of peopling the country. The extra year had proved to be a disincentive to those who wished to relocate to the New World voluntarily. In 1688, in Massachusetts, a remarkable event occurred that opened a strange window into the world endured by enslaved Irishmen and women, and provided more than a little insight into the minds of their masters. It involved allegations of demonic possession involving an old washerwoman and a family of Puritans. The case was a precursor to the witchcraft trials in Salem in 1692. Immigrants from Ireland, many Irish continued to be sent. An account of the case was written by Cotton Mather, the famous minister of the North Church in Boston. It begins as follows. Memorable providences relating to witchcraft and possession, a faithful account of many wonderful and surprising things that have befallen several bewitched and possessed persons in New England, particularly a narrative of the marvelous trouble and relief experienced by a pious family in Boston, very lately and sadly molested with evil spirits. Mather had a questing mind and a vivid imagination, and he was quick to spot the devil's work among his flock. The devil could be discovered anywhere, even in the inexplicable children. There dwelled at this time in the south part of Boston a sober and pious man whose name is John Goodwin, whose trade is that of a mason, and whose wife, to which a good report gives a share with him in all the characters of virtue, has made him the father of 6 now living children. Of these children, all but the eldest, who worked with his father at his calling, and the youngest, who lives yet upon the breast of its mother, have labored under the direful effects of a no less palatable than stupendous witchcraft. Indeed, that exempted son had also, as was thought, some lighter touches of it, countable stabs and pains now and then upon him, as indeed every person in the family at some time or other had, except the godly father and the suckling infant, who never felt any impression of it. Mather's tale is one of demonic attacks upon the children, in which they suffered assault by unseen hands. When one Goodwin child suffered pains in the neck, another did, and so on. Physicians of great repute were called, but could only agree that it must be witchcraft. As luck would have it, a likely suspect was close to hand. A non-believer in the earth form of an old Irish woman called Anne Glover, known as Goody, whose daughter was the Goodwin washerwoman. Anne had victim written all over her. She was beached in a foreign land run by English Puritans, whose idea of a good time was to hunt out demons and Catholics. Massachusetts must have been a dull place in the late 17th century, but Goody was soon to liven things up. Among her powers, she could make children fly and ride on invisible horses. About midsummer in the year 1688, the eldest of these children, who is a daughter, saw cause to examine their washerwoman upon their missing of some linen, which 'twas feared she had stolen from them, and of what use this linen might be to serve the witchcraft intended, the thief's tempter knows. This laundress was the daughter of an ignorant and a scandalous old woman in the neighborhood, whose miserable husband, before he died, had sometimes complained of her that she was undoubtedly a witch, and that whenever his head was laid, she would quickly arrive unto the punishments due to such as one. This woman, in her daughter's defense bestowed very bad language upon the girl that put her to the question, immediately upon which the poor child became variously indisposed in her health and visited with strange fits beyond those that attend an epilepsy or a catalepsy, or those that they call the diseases of astonishment. At her trial, Ann Glover's elementary test for possession, she could not recite the Lord's Prayer in English. This was hardly surprising, for she spoke not a word of the language. It has been said she could recite the prayer in Irish and in Latin, but that this cut no ice with the court. The knitted dolls found in her house proved she was obviously up to no good. Foreigner, Roman Catholic, and devil worshiper, and scored a hat trick. She was hanged. As Mather himself said at the end of his account, this is the story of the Goodwin's children, all made up of wonders. Never a truer word has been written. The days were numbered for Irish servants like Goody Glover and her daughter in Massachusetts. Though other American colonies remained open to the importation of Irish labor, the same was true for island colonies such as Jamaica and Barbados. To this day in Jamaica, Irish surnames abound. The first Irish imported to the island arrived shortly after the British captured it from the Spanish, when the Cromwellian generals William Penn, the father of the founder of Pennsylvania, and Robert Venables failed to take Hispaniola from the Spanish in 1655, they took Jamaica, not wishing to return home and face Oliver Cromwell empty-handed. The island's economy required extra labor, and so they turned to islands already stocked with strong young Irishmen: Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Christopher, and Montserrat. Barbados, in particular, seems to have had plenty of laborers to choose from. In 1660, half of the white people in Barbados were said to be Irish. They were rarely the planters, but unquestionably the servants. After the wars and social upheavals of the middle of the century, one might have expected that transportation of Irish to serve as slave colonies might have died out. It did not, but it did tail off. In the hills and bogs, bandits and rebels continued to be rounded up occasionally and shipped off to cool their heels in the colonies. And even in the farthest outposts of the colonies, Ireland continued to be indentured. In Newfoundland in the 1680s, fishermen, many of them Irish or Scottish, accumulated debts they could not pay off. They were then forced to give themselves up as indentured servants. But the flow of Irish laborers to the colonies was not yet staunch, nor would it be for some time yet. In the following century, Ireland and its people became subject to new laws that made transportation a key part of. Meanwhile, dissent was growing in another part of the nation. And that concludes chapter 9. Whew, that was quite lengthy, but most informative and very interesting. Oh, my goodness.
You know what? I just wanted to say I took a couple of notes at first. It is so interesting because, I noticed, our people will talk about, the transatlantic slave trade. We have no idea that the origins of that was modern Europeans and not us.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
man.
Oh, my God, yes. You're right.
And then because some may not really know, the difference, some listeners may not know the difference or, see the difference when you say immigrant and immigrant. When they left on their ship, they were immigrants with an E, meaning that they cut from their homeland, and wherever they land, when they get off that ship, they are absolutely, unequivocally immigrants. All right, so there it is. And the other thing, isn't that interesting? Because when we went down to Ellis Island, we saw that. It says it right there, immigrant. Yeah, which means, they're immigrants no matter where, once they get off that ship, being whether they were getting off the ship as slaves or not slaves, they are still immigrants, period. We have to get that clear.
That's
the other thing is that, wow. And it's interesting that this chapter was called Foreigners in Their Own Land. Ain't that something?
Yeah, you know what? What was kind of really saddening to me is as I read what happened to, the people of Ireland, which I suspect could very well either have been Moors, branded Irish, or could have been. It could have actually been, it could have actually been modern European. I mean, it's something to investigate.
Oh,
but,
sure.
I was listening to what happened to them, and they say it in that chapter that what happened in the Americas is what was also going on in what is called Ireland, to the point where it became a desolate land.
I saw that. I'll tell you what else. The relationship now, the Irish slaves, they came through the Caribbean, and this just absolutely, affirms that, And I was shocked to see how many Irish had actually inhabited the Caribbean, West Indies, etc., like that. And then we all heard about the Arawak, so now we can identify.
The Arawak,
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Well, I can tell you, I could tell you that the, I didn't catch it, but my children did. A lot of the people that come from the Caribbean, any of those Caribbean islands, their accent, they're probably not even aware of their accent, but the children, they hear it. Because I remember I was watching this movie called The Matchmaker, and there was a part in there where they had this elder so-called Irish modern European talking, and and the way he was talking, I understood what he was saying, and my children understood what he was saying, but they pointed out to me that the modern European Irish in this movie sounded, portraying the Irish and the Irish sounding voice, sounded just like their grandfather, who's from the island. And I had watched the movie and never made the connection. So when they made that statement, I had to pause and listen, and I started laughing because it was exactly like many of the people in my family. There is a huge. There was something going on there. I don't know if it's an influence or maybe it was an originating, but it's there. You can hear it.
Yeah. Well, I had a dear friend who, her mother was from Jamaica, and she had a very heavy accent. However, her daughter, which was my friend, and her son, which was my friend, they never heard the accent of their mother. Naturally, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And they never spoke in the accent of their mother. And they just didn't even hear it, but everyone else could hear the accent of their mother. It was really, really strange. But let me just add, this also, I noticed that they would give them any reason to get on that daggone good ship lollipop. They were like, what the hell? You know, your religion, nobody likes your religion, so you may as well leave here. I saw that they had religion nonconformist. Mm-hmm.
And that to me, that was like real. It was, I mean, they what is it? They exiled the people of this landmass simply because of their religious choice. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank God. I guess that's why you have, religious freedom.
Right, and the way they did it was so heinous. It was so. I mean, but you know what? And I'm going to tell you what that is like. They did it in such brutal zeal. Mm-hmm. What it reminds me of in today's atmosphere, and it's very sad. Everywhere you go, the prison, these fraudulent operations to extort income from the people, they are being run by the family members of the people they're extorting from. And they're doing this with such zeal. Like some of the horror stories these stories that they're talking about, the way they have treated the people that they have kidnapped or abducted, or they have forcibly transported to another location. All of this is happening in this prison industry that is 1,000% unconstitutional. And what really shows the mental enslavement of people is when you can call prison an industry and it's okay.
That's right. I'm telling you.
Nobody says that is not normal. Everybody's like, and in relation to this, I was talking with Jayana today, and she told me the same thing that she was telling me and experiencing today. I experienced it yesterday when I went to inquire about a parking ticket in a non-commercial area. The people who are working there, not the high-paying people, the low-paying people, they are Asiatic. They're family members, and they're very not well trained. But the people coming in there are absolutely clueless. It's like they really believe, their mental conditioning says, I know you're going to find me, and that's okay. No, it's not. Their argument is, okay, you're going to find me, but I'm not paying that much. Can we negotiate how much I'm going to pay? And there were several people that came in there with a bill of 85 notes that was reduced to 35, and they were okay with that. Let me tell you the problem with that. They're going to come back next month and do the same thing all over again. Unless you put your foot down.
Leeches. Wow.
Yes, exactly. It's like they're like that's right. It's like this is the way they think. Oh, this one is illiterate, doesn't know how to think, has no clue about law, and thinks that this is normal. This is a good thing. we can come back that on the bother if you can list.
Yeah.
Because they're going to suck the blood
get
right out of
every time.
It's a good vein. Put this on the bottom of the candle.
Wow. Wow, man. Right.
That's
not
exactly
normal.
what they're doing. That's why what did the prophet say? Study. Now,
and free your mind. Free your mind,
yes.
and your behind will follow, because once you have the truth, maxims of truth, right, it automatically transforms you as to what it is you're in, what it is you're dealing with, what it is you're looking at. It automatically does that. Just by having that knowledge will change everything.
Right.
You know, because you can't go back, you know, and then it fills in the spots that are missing and keeps you from being in that mental slavery, you know, place. Oh, yeah, no, we got to do this, and, you know, they're the government, you know, because that's the first thing you're going to recognize is, wait a minute, they ain't that. What you talking about? But let me just say this, and I just have one more comment after that. That brings me to when you're talking about the Irishmen and the way they were treated. My mind started thinking, no wonder the Irishmen were so and are so rowdy. They know themselves as being rowdy. They had to fight. They were really mistreated. I'm not saying I feel any more compassion for them than anyone else, but I'm just saying. You know what I'm saying? That's the history they have.
Yeah.
This is wow. Oh my goodness. And lastly, and then I yield. I noticed, I forgot to write the page down on this one, where they talked about the first Quaker, Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Now, New Jersey is originally New Caesar. A lot of people may not know that if they do their history. And it brought me to the fact that I know there's probably some other places in New Jersey or at New Jersey that are still Quaker, but I don't know if Ms. is listening, but we're going to have to go straight over to this place called Ocean City, because to this they are considered a Quaker town. Now, I know that if we go there and get the history on them, we're going to dig up some stuff, because to this day, you got to come over the bridge if you want to get, they don't sell any alcohol, wine, nothing. They have no alcohol stores at all. You have to come over the bridge to the next town, and they have, of course, at the foot of that bridge, they got the biggest liquor store in the world, and people will come over. I'm going to show you this. Buy something, go right. They put a little U-turn type thing, on it, so you can just come over, boom, go right back on and jug hands on that. I'm serious. So if we go there, I bet you we're going to find some stuff. Islam might be able to fall.
All right. So, look, at this time, what we're going to do is anyone who wants to participate in discussing what was read out of this book, oh, Jesus, what did I do with my book? Out of the book White Cargo, White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. Press 1 on your telephone dial. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute everyone, and we have a conversation. Now, please, one thing, if you have any background noise, please mute your phone until you're ready to talk, so that because it's going to come over and it's going to be recorded, and it's going to interfere with people's ability to listen and pay attention. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to unmute people. If you did not want to participate, please press 1 on your telephone dial, and you will come out of the queue. Now, I also I wanted to have Bakari and Asim do a presentation, but Bakari just lost. He just fell off, and I need to. I don't know how he's going to get back in, because 30 and after 9:30, if you drop off, you're not going to be able to get back in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up those people who want to participate in the conversation. As I said, press 1, and let's hear what some people have to say about the information that was just presented, and I'll see if we can circle back and get Bakari and Asim in to do their presentation on what I did was I asked them to look at the coordinate that was given last week, the coordinates, the latitude and longitudinal coordinates of the Virginia Company and I think the Plymouth Company or the area, I think it was the area that was granted to Walter Raleigh, and to look on the map and tell us what does the parameter of that look like if we were to look at a map today. So that was the assignment. While I'm going to try and get Bakari in, let's listen to what some other callers or some other listening audience has to say about what was discussed. So we have a caller here that's classified as anonymous. Are you there? Keith, are you there? Okay, and we have caller 510334. Are you there?
Islam.
All right, Islam.
Yeah.
All right, hold on. And then caller 76063. Are you there?
Islam, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am. Okay, and hold on.
I want to
Asim, is that you?
Off.
Yes, it's mine.
You can
All
call
right,
them
hold
in.
on. And then I have caller 408840. Are you there?
This is RVBey. I'm here.
All righty, great. Now, I know you, Asim, are you ready to do that presentation? I mean, not right now. I just want to know if you wanted to do it today. I'm going to see if I can get Bakari back in as well.
Absolutely. Yes, I can go in on that. And Bakari having a problem with his network right now. It might be rain, storm, or something also.
I'm going to see if I can conference him in. But while I'm doing that, because I want everybody to hear, some of the people who I unmuted, is there anyone who would like to comment on the 2 chapters that were just read out of the book White Cargo?
Hello?
Steve.
Hello?
Steve, are you there?
Hello?
Steve. Okay, it must be your phone because I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
We can use the phone.
All right. Did you want to comment on the 2 chapters that were read?
Right now I'm listening.
All right. And what's the first 3 digits of your phone number?
760.
All right. I'll mute you. All right. So we have some feedback. I'm not sure who it's coming from. All right.
It's not me because I'm muted.
All right. So we have caller 510334. We got Brother Asim and we got Brother Al. Does anyone want to talk about the 2 chapters that was read? Comments or anything?
This is RVBey.
Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted. I'll comment. Start the conversation. Some of the things that one of the things that I got clear with is the laws, the statutes. I was writing so much down on. Okay, here we go. When they was going in
on the constable. They was getting a warrant from the magistrate. You hear this phrase even today when someone gets sold down the river. The Lord of Admiralty warrant, where they were able to get this here warrant, these magistrates and these judges. What I'm alluding to is these municipalities and their offices and the way that they set up different from what somewhat different from what I'm trying to be clear on this here. The council, well, let me just draw the picture so I can explain this here.
All right.
Here near this territory where I'm at, they have these villages. They got unincorporated towns and cities, and in some of those places, they still have a justice of the peace. And what you come to find out is that this justice of the peace has more power than these magistrates and these and some of these magistrates and these judges. All right.
Well, and I can tell you why. Because see, we are calling them magistrates, but they're simply ministerial hearing officers, which is equivalent to a clerk. That's why if you go to the clerk, many clerks, it's not because she's a clerk that she has power. Most clerks are also notary publics, which is a justice of the peace. And that's why many got more power than the ministerial hearing officer that people call the magistrate or a judge. That's why. I just wanted to interject that.
Well, yeah, and exactly, and understood. So when you seeing here that for some of these slaves that were being set up and they was taken before these magistrates and things, and they were easily bribed and stuff because they was just administrators, you know. And then they did have some justices that were trying to do something because they had the power to try to do something, but the magistrates and these judges, they were just figurative speaking. But if people have been following the reading and they see what was set up with Walter Raleigh and in chapter 2 and 3, what was set up there, where they painted that whole picture in creating in England, creating laws and everything to set up the people to be taken off the street. Anyway, what I'm alluding to is how they painted this whole picture in the chapters prior of what they was doing in England to set the stage for bringing those the children, then the vagants, and then the people over here as slaves. Like it was all premeditated to go on and do this here. When you read how they set this up already in the beginning chapters, all right? So I wanted to mention that because as you was reading that, a whole picture, I'm very visual, and a whole picture was forming in my mind how they sit, for instance, in the church, the priest was ministering to the people about how good it would be for your children to go to a new land. And the people, oh, yeah, the new land going to America, yeah, we're going to set way and make plans for our children to go to this new land, knowing that this stuff was going on. When they got to that new land, they was giving up their rights. And when they got there, it sets up where it talked, and it clearly, and this guy clearly talked about the propaganda, how they set up the propaganda to sell the new world.
Yeah.
When they clearly knew that they needed these people to work those plantations. And
that's right.
So when Gilbert set up his blueprint early on, and he gave it to Elizabeth, he already had it all mapped out, and she agreed to it. Her and her council agreed to it. And now, when we see in these chapters now, it's like when these municipalities and stuff molest you, and then they send you a letter saying that it's the state doing it, and the state is not even aware. Well, they know what's going on. There's no question. They know what's going on. Like in the early chapters where it said that the Queen gave Surratt to Raleigh and Gilbert the license and the grant to come over here. And if you've seen any, so happen to come across any Spanish lands or something like that, go on and take their land too. It's the guy, this dude was just the way he drew this here thing out. If you was following it and if you see it and you see what's going on today, you see it's the exact same thing. And we talked about it earlier, just like you alluded to, the practice that they had in 500 BC, 600 BC, 700 BC, because the listeners of this here have to do a little further research, and the guy only wanted to allude to it a little bit, and he only went back to 1066 and 1166. But if you go back a little further, then you really will see who the Irish were. When you really go back to the cults and all this here, and when you go back to the Normans when they came in and they started invading, you really see who these people are. They were Moors.
Yep, that's right.
And so he only went back to 1016, and how they after they invaded Ireland and Welsh, and you have to get a map so you can see it, just like we got these coordinates, all right? You're going to see the same coordinates that I'm going to give you a little earlier when you tell me when you're ready for it, Annie.
Whenever you're ready. You and
okay.
I got Bakari. Bakari, are you there?
Okay.
Yes, Islam.
All right. So
Islam.
I'm trusting you two had a chance to speak. I was I had intended to talk to you before the broadcast, but we ran out of electricity. The power went out, so I had some other things I had to take care of, so I wasn't able to touch bases with you before the broadcast, but I know you guys got it situated.
Well, we talked about it a little bit, so Bakari got some coordinates.
All right.
I have
take it away.
Also. So you want to go in first, Bakari?
Sure.
All right. Go ahead.
Well, it's a pleasure. First and foremost, let me say honors to the panel, and then certainly honors to you, Brother Asim, and I will try to get through this really quick. I generated a 4-pager, and so I'm just going to touch on these points, and if anybody has any questions, what I'll do is, now, I have. Let me preface the document. So what I've done is I've done a short document, basically on the issuing of this letters patent to Walter Raleigh. He was referred to as Sir Walter Raleigh. And so I'm going to briefly discuss who he is, time frame, some other particulars. I also have specific latitude and longitude for London, England, as Brother mentioned, Paris, France, Dublin, Ireland, Westminster, London. And so, first and foremost, there's a lot of information in this document that those who are interested should be looking at. For those of you who aren't familiar with this type of historical analysis or documentation, then you should, if you don't have a pen and pencil right now or at the outset of this show, then you're not really prepared. But some of the things that I would encourage people to ask themselves is, what is a charter? When you start looking at this information, it's a written grant by a country's legislative or sovereign power by which an institution or individuals obtain rights or authorization to do a given thing, to start a company, to move individuals from point A to point B, to reconnoiter, to conduct military operations, to conduct commerce, just all manner of things, to seize built-up areas, which is homes, houses, castles, etc. Now, what type of charter was it, and who wrote it, and for what purpose? So, again, now you have to look at what is a letters patent. And after reading this document, after going through the several pages, the language clearly states whoever generated the document was probably some sort of clerk on behalf of so-called Queen Elizabeth. And so before I go there and speak about Queen Elizabeth, just briefly, a letters patent. It was generated. This document essentially was generated from my research and from reading the words. It's essentially for conquest, for reconnaissance, for control of resources, for land, for anything in a built-up area. Built-up areas are any land mass or any area of land that has structures on it, equipment, minerals, gold, silver, etc., animals, fur trading, and all sorts of other types of activity associated with how animals were viewed by these individuals. So Walter Raleigh, his title was a writer, a poet, a soldier, a politician, a courtier, a spy, an explorer. Of course, for this mission, during this time frame, he was, according to the document, listed as an esquire and also a trustee and a servant. And so he was born roughly in 1552 or 1554 and passed form in 1618, a total of 69 years of age. And essentially, he was tasked, for whatever reason, from previous activity, he was tasked with this mission to go from what is referred to as England to northwestern Mexico, to basically take whatever he could get his hands on, secure it, and do so for, of course, according to the language in the document, for not only himself, his heirs, or his descendants, etc., but also for the sovereignty in England and all people in good standing. And subsequent to his initial tasking, he eventually had some a rough time. But before I go into that, he was a Protestant. He was born to a Protestant family in Devon, and I believe, I'm not certain what city or what continent that was on. And let's go through this here real quickly. He rose rapidly in favor of Queen Elizabeth I, and Queen Elizabeth I, let's, as I move down here real quick, let's talk about her. Now, if I have my dates correct, Queen Elizabeth I came into this world in 1558 and left in 1603. And she, let me make sure that's correct here. And so, going back up now, he rose in favor, and she was knighted, so she subsequently knighted him in 1585, but that didn't last very long. He essentially married one of her ladies in waiting without asking for permission, and so she dropped him in the Tower of London. He was subsequently released, and in 1594, he heard of another mission for the City of Gold in South, what we refer to as South Mexam, Southwest Mexam, or South America, and subsequently, as it states here, in 1594, Raleigh heard of a city of gold in South America and sailed to find it, which is another adventure, another story about essentially this type of activity, where he's moving from one nation to the next and basically, looking for minerals, looking for anything that they deem to be valuable, regardless of whether it was previously under the control of other nationals, other nations, etc., regardless of any treaty, because it doesn't mention any treaties in the document. It doesn't mention any, states. It doesn't mention any other nations other than if they're not Christians, if they're not under the control of some Christian prince, basically you can do with it what you will. The language specifically states that he has, and I want to be very, very specific, and I want to be very, very fair here. And so, first and foremost, let's talk about some of the language in terms of why he was sent there. And give me just a second as I scroll down to the next page. And it says here, now this is via page 53 of the document, and it's specific to the purpose of the letters patent. And I quote, Raleigh was told to, quote, search, discover, find out such remote heathen and barbarous lands, countries, and territories not actually possessed of any Christian prince nor inhabited by Christian people. So now that's a very specific statement. And moving on, and here is some other information. Quote, by license of us, our heirs, successors. Now, us in this particular sentence here, part of the paragraph, what they mean by us is those from England or the people in control over there. Our heirs, successors, shall go or travel thither to inhabit or remain there to build and fortify at the discretion of the said Walter Raleigh. So this individual, Walter Raleigh, was given a huge undertaking, a huge task. And when the term fortify, what I take that to mean is that when he gets over here, he is to build and set things up, strengthen things up, i.e. a fort perhaps, or some sort of structure like a castle or something of that nature, and so on. So this was a serious mission here. Some of the other things that are extremely important that I would, recommend that other individuals do is when they look up the definition of letters, patent, is that they, take that very seriously, in terms of comprehending a letter's patent, what a letter's patent is. But what I would also ask myself is who, what was going on in that time? What happened like 100 years prior to this thing even happening, and what happened 100 years after it happened? So, 1485 and 1685, just to get an idea of what's taking place. So as far as my research shows, this document and its purpose was clearly issued by individuals, whether or not they were true sovereigns or not. I'm not going to really spend much time discussing that. Whatever the case, these individuals had control of seats of power, and they were basically saying, go over there, take whatever you can, control as much land, do whatever you can to maintain it, secure it, and, subsequently things will happen in the future as we move forward. There were several other individuals that were mentioned throughout this reading, and I haven't had time to really dig into their affairs and who they were, and Sir William Cecil Knight, Lord Burghley, High Treasurer of England. And my question would be is that this individual, Sir William Cecil Knight, was listed as a counselor. And now you have a counselor and now you have a treasurer. So if these two individuals were going to be accompanying this individual, Mr. Raleigh, why would you send a treasurer and why would you send a counselor, and what level of counseling was he authorized to give? So this is like some serious activity that's going on here. So as I prepare to close, in short, the latitude and from Westminster, London, is 51 degrees north, and the longitude is 0 degrees 0 degrees west. 0 by I think it's 7 minutes, and so that's for Westminster, London. And I'm going to let these locations are specific to certain activities that took place, and I'm not sure why we had to capture that information. Anna, you can break that down. But before I close, I wanted to say one other thing, and give me just a second here as I scroll down to my notes. Just 1 second here. What is the letter's patent? What is the purpose of the letter? Which Elizabeth are they referring to? One of the other things that I want to say here real quickly, and I don't want to jump tracks. I want to stay focused on this activity of 1585. But as I looked, as I was doing my research, 1585, and I look at that date, and then I look at other dates of things that happened several hundred years after that. If these individuals were all modern Europeans who were in 1585 enslaved, indentured, treated horribly along that time frame, 1400s, 1600s, 1700s, and when I look at that information, it sounds to me like all of the individuals on the ground were modern Europeans who were either tasked to go with him. Maybe there were some Moors in there, here and there. I don't know, but Elizabeth I, from what I gathered, she was of mixed blood. She was not a 100%, or she was
a 100% modern European. Her mother's European, and she's a European. Her father was Henry VIII, who is, on the surface, appears to have been a Moor, but she was a modern European. Right. But there's some history that you have to know about why that puts Elizabeth in that seat, and it's not relative at this moment to this information, but it is relevant when you look at it in the scheme of things. So that for people who are listening, I believe you're talking about the charter to Walter Raleigh from Elizabeth I of Great Britain.
Correct.
Or actually, in this case, it's England. If anyone would like a copy of that, what I will do is I will put a copy up on the moorishnews.wordpress.com page, and you can go and download it and review it in relation to what was read from the beginning of this reading. It talks about Walter Raleigh and the coordinates and things of that nature. So this is what Bakari and Asim are referring to. So just so that you're not a little bit confused, because we really didn't say that. I mean, we didn't let it be known that that's what was being discussed as it relates to what we found here. So I will be putting that up, and you will be able to you can grab it from there. But continue, Brother Bakari. I'm not sure if you're going to continue or if you're going. Go ahead.
I just have a quick statement here. So in synopsis, without getting into I don't want to jump tracks and get into the bloodline situation with Elizabeth, but it seems that throughout that time frame, the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, and even the 1700s, that there were many individuals globally who were, like their father was a Moor, mother modern European, and now they're in a position of authority to make decisions. Or vice versa, where the son is mother's was a Moor, modern European or European or Caucasian, father was a Moor, and so this is a dynamic that it's showing, it's raising its head globally, and so that is a very, very important aspect to look into with your research. And now, as I close, getting back on topic here, as I close my research, brief research for this activity in 1585 is such that this individual, Sir Walter Raleigh, was in fact a soldier. Whatever his other titles may or be or were, he was in fact a soldier and or a spy, and this was in fact a military operation. And I say that based on the wording in the document. This was not an operation where he was just sent to go hang out and chill for a minute and then come back and, no, this was military operation. He was tasked to go look at territories, countries. He was tasked to take whomever he could find that wanted to go, that was willing to go. And it was alluded that it was not going to be easy, that it would be difficult. To further comment on that is that essentially he was not able to do anything. He was never able to firmly establish a solid foundation, if you will, no pun intended, on Northwest Amexem, and he was eventually put to death. And that's the kind of respect and admiration he was given, after several travels abroad. Whether or not that had anything to do with the situation with the maid in waiting, I don't know. But he was in fact he was in fact a soldier, and this was in fact, based on my research, a military operation. Last thing that I want to say is that it is extremely, extremely important for anyone that is listening that is serious about studying this information. You cannot just look at the date in question. You cannot look at 1585 and try to get a big picture of what happened from the 1100s to the 1900s. It's not going to happen that way. Anaid and Roswamaya, Cujo, the Prophet, everybody who has been a serious Moor that has been involved in some sort of activity involving study recognizes that this is a global thing. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. You have to study. Mm-hmm. And with that, I respectfully yield the floor. Islam.
All right. Oh, thank you for that. That was great.
Great job, Bacardi. And I want to further build on it. Is it all right? I want to go in on that also because
now let me just say this.
Go ahead.
Sam, I hate to say this, but it is 11 after 10. So the line is going to go down at 10:29. So just keep that in mind.
All right. So I want to go quick. Yes, that job that he was given, which Bacardi was right, but ultimately that charter was to establish a colony here on Northwest Amexem, Maghreb El Aqsa. It was to establish the first colony here, and Bacardi explained that how it would be done by hook or crook, military force, whatever it took to do it. All right. So now, when we further go into this here, and we take that charter, and you compare that charter with White Cargo and what was read in White Cargo, and we find out.
I'm here.
Yeah.
He dropped out.
What happened? No,
he dropped out.
No, not yet. He did?
I
don't see that he dropped out. I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. He just dropped right out. He was just getting ready to get into it.
Yeah.
No, he's still here.
Oh, but he can't hear you?
No. Oh, my gosh. He must not know that let me see if I can text him real quick. Oh.
Yeah, he probably doesn't. He probably can't
hear
you.
No. Oh, my goodness. hear you. He's still there. He didn't drop. Oh my goodness. I'm telling you, boy, this is the communication yesterday and today. Okay, wait a minute. Still showing up. He didn't fall off.
That's interesting.
This has been one really interesting night, I'll tell you. He's still there. Oh, my God, I hope he's not talking. He's probably just talking away. He doesn't realize we can't hear him. Oh, my God, this is terrible. Let me see if I can call Teresa.
I'll send him a text.
Wait a minute. I just got something from him. I just got something. Okay, did you mute by accident? No. Oh, wow. Shoot. What the heck?
What?
I don't, we can't hear him. He doesn't know why. If he hangs up, it's going to disconnect the call.
Can you hear me?
There he is. I'm going to talk again. All right.
Hurry up and get it done. From the 38th parallel will be from down Norfolk, Virginia area up to the 40th parallel will be up what they call New England, the England of the West. So that would include Connecticut. Can you hear me?
Do you realize that we could not hear you till just now? So unfortunately, you would have to start over with the last.
My goodness.
As soon as you went to talk, you went mute.
That's about 10.
Okay.
You got about 10 minutes. It's 20.
All right, let me try it again.
Yes, please try it again because you get ready to go in.
Hello. Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Can you hear me?
You're breaking up.
Oh, it must be the area where I'm at.
All right, now you sound great. So you just,
let me
start over
right
again because right.
All right. The 38th parallel would be Virginia. Up to the 40th parallel would be what they call New England. And what New England is a composition of 6 states: Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts. Name the other ones.
Boston,
Vermont.
Vermont.
Maine, Vermont, Rhode Island,
New Hampshire.
And New Hampshire. That's it, New Hampshire. All that, when you're reading in these documents, they call that New England. All right? And so that will be the 40th parallel on the eastern shore. So anytime you get a charter or something like that, most charters have to have the area where you're going to do business at. Even if you start a corporation, or a company, and you register with the state saying that you're going to do business in a certain state or something like that, well, that's in your charter is where you're going to be doing business at. And so you see when you read it is that it wasn't nothing below the 38th parallel. And the 38th parallel will be below Virginia because that territory was already in the hands of the Spaniards during that time. And then that 40th parallel allowed them to go all the way up to Maine into Canada, area there. Now, also remember, when you see that today, it's artificial borders drawn. And what I mean by that is that what would be Connecticut today, back then might have encompassed Rhode Island and a bigger area, is what I'm trying to say. For instance, down south, you had the Carolinas at one time, which included North Carolina and South Carolina until they drew an artificial border to separate the Carolinas. And at one time, the Carolinas went all the way down and included Georgia. And when you start studying, you see when they started creating these artificial borders to separate South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and those things up into Florida. So it used to stretch all the way there. Now remember, nothing was going on west of the Allegheny as far as England was concerned. West of the Allegheny, Mexico came all the way up and over past, and you have to get old maps of 1540 and look at these old maps so you see what territories and who had what. So you see what territories the French had, what territories the Spaniards had, and what territories England had. And England was a newcomer to this land, really, if you really look at it, all right? They came afterwards because the Spaniards, these Vikings and Swedes and things like that, they were here before they even came. So, but I just wanted to get that parallel together. Now, if you take that parallel and take it all the way across over to Europe, you'll see that in those parallels, the weather is similar. So if you take that parallel and you get a map or a globe and you look at it and you follow that 38th parallel all the way across the Atlantic Ocean over into Europe, you see it be Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales, and it'll be that same type of weather type of thing over there, the colder land. Now, the Spaniards was below the 38th parallel, and if you follow that over, you'll follow that over closer to Portuguese, Spain, northern Morocco, in that area where it was warmer climate. And so all those things correlated with them coming over here also. So at those times. So those was the coordinates that I had and where I got those coordinates from. Now let's talk about that charter too. The original charter that was given to his brother, Sir Humphrey. Now both of them was in the military and they was ruthless. They would come in and just cut the heads off of people. They don't give a damn what it was. They just cut the heads off. All right, and the Queen rewarded them for being ruthless soldiers like that, and that's how they moved up in ranks. All right. Now the charter was originally given to his half brother Humphrey, and in the end of the charter was given for 6 years. So the charter would end in 1584. Now, what happened was how Walter Raleigh got into that first charter was his brother got killed on one of the 5 voyages. I think it was on the 4th voyage. His brother died, and so Walter Raleigh continued the charter. He asked, can he take over the charter for his brother, and they gave him the charter. Now, that charter should have been null and void because they never established a colony. From the time period that they was given that charter, that they never established a colony. So when Queen Elizabeth died and James I took over, what happened was he reinitiated the charter, and that's where, when you read that charter, that's where you see where I came up with the 38th to the 40th parallel, because he reissued the charter to Walter Raleigh, and when you see that charter, you'll see that they went back, and then that's when they established the colony, because they went back to the same area of the charter, and through hook, crook, and experience, learning how to deal with it over those periods of years, coming over here and dealing with the natives and stuff, all right, they was able to get a foothold in and then establish the charter. And then from there, you start seeing that European expansion. Well, I want to say the Spaniards were Europeans too. A lot of them was Moors, but they were Europeans because Spain is in Europe. So understand, when you hear they're Spaniards, they're Europeans. But the English Europeans up out of England, north of Spain, who we're talking about, you see where they got a foothold in, and then like Bakari was saying, things was global. So after Europe went back in the Dark Ages, and this is what they're talking about when Europe goes back into the Dark Age, it was a lot of war, deceit. And when you're talking about the queen, you had the mixing of the blood, the corruption of the blood and things like that for these different thrones as you start studying more. All right, and then you see out of in 17, and I'm getting ahead of myself because you see in 1707 or from 1701 to 1707 when England and that area united, and then they really thrust hell on the Moors on El Aqsa, in El Maghrib after they united in Europe. So I wish I had more time because I'm sort of rushing to really get it in.
Yeah, you know
so
what? I think what we're going to do is we're going to have to revisit this because, maybe, let's see, next Wednesday we will be at the National Theater, and then that's the second Wednesday, and then the third Wednesday, Abdullah will be at the National Theater. So then we won't meet back to discuss this until the fourth Wednesday of this month, which is a drag, I know. It is so interesting. It's so interesting. But what we will do is when we meet back to discuss this in the fourth Wednesday of August, we will start out talking about, maybe I'll read just one chapter, and then we can discuss more in depth this charter, and maybe even, because wasn't there another charter? I'll have to see if I have it, because I think I do have the other charter that you're talking about. And by the way, I did put up that it's the Walter Raleigh Charter of 1584, and it is up on the moorishnews.wordpress.com website, right underneath the link to download the book, and that's under the picture of the book. So it's 10:26. We had a great time. Asim, Bakari, you guys did a great job, and I know there's more to be, provided or explained or presented. So definitely when we meet back to read the book on the fourth Wednesday of August, you guys got to come and maybe we'll just take up the whole show with talking about this charter. But we'll talk and decide, because if it's a lot of information, because these charters, they need to be comprehended. People are running around here talking about charters, and they really don't have a clue exactly what the charter is, how it was utilized, how was it presented to them. Was it a new charter? Was it an old charter? So these are things that I think we need a little bit more time and detail to discuss, and we need some more people to ask questions. So we got 1-2 minutes before the broadcast ends. And let's see, today's Wednesday. We have no more classes this week, so we'll meet you back next Tuesday of Principles of Nationality and Action. And then Wednesday, we'll meet you back at the National Theater. We'll be there live in the flesh. Thank you, Bakari, Asim, Raz. Are you still there?
I sure am. I enjoyed it all. Yes, I am.
Right,
this is a lot. This is great. I want to hear. I would love to hear Asim's presentation as well. So first thing on the agenda.
Yes.
On the next Wednesday.
Yes.
Yes.
So, wonderful broadcast, wonderful presentation, and thank you to our listening audience. We shall see you next week. Peace and love.
Islam.